Isaiah 20, verse 5 beginning, or verse 3 beginning actually. Tony, would you word prayer for us this morning?
Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all the many blessings you've given us. We thank you for this time that we can come and study your word. We pray for all the teachers this morning that they can bring your word to us in a way that we can understand it. We pray that you will be with us during the worship this morning and that we do everything in accordance with the Bible. Most of all, we thank you for Christ and his sacrifice. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Fifth chapter of, or the 20th chapter of Isaiah deals with Egypt and Ethiopia. Then we're going to get into prophecies with regard to Edom in the next chapter, with regard to Babylon, with regard to the Arabians. So I guess a question comes up. You know, God was dealing with Judah. At this point in time, the northern tribes were about to be carried away into Assyrian captivity. And maybe you wonder, why does he deal with Edom, Arabia, Babylon, Egypt, Ethiopia? I mean, Scripture's all about Israel. It's all about Judah. Why all these other countries brought into the equation? If there was a prophet today, a prophet here in America, there was really a prophet like Isaiah here in America today, the prophet would probably be dealing with current issues, right? And would be projecting what's going to happen, years to come. Now, Isaiah was a real live person in a real live setting, and that setting involved various nations around about Judah, right? Now, our president I don't know whether he's back in Washington or wherever. I haven't caught up on the news this morning. But he's been over in Japan and South Korea. He's been in China, Vietnam. I don't know where else. I've been out of the loop as far as news is concerned for the last couple of days, including today. What's he doing over there? I mean, what's he doing? Now think about that.
Relationships.
Talk to Putin, I guess. He's making deals, right? Well, that's what countries do, isn't it? Saudi Arabia is, they're making deals with this country and that country. That's what countries do. They form coalitions, alliances. That's what they've always done. Is that right? That's what nations do. Nations fight, and so they nations kind of figure out, who's the big enemy, and who is this big enemy after. And in this setting, in the Isaiah setting, who was after Judah? Well, who was after northern Israel? Well, Assyria. Well, who was after Judah? Assyria. Who was after Egypt? Assyria. Who was after Ethiopia? Assyria in this time frame. But then later on, Assyria was out of the picture. Why? Because Babylonia became the world power. And then when Judah went into captivity to the Babylonian Empire, who came along next? Medo-Persian Empire. Medes and the Persians. And so you have this, I guess, you have this dynamic, as younger folks are prone to say, you have all these moving parts, and these alliances are all moving. Now, if a prophet were here today, he would be talking about contemporary issues. He would be talking about, if he was really a prophet, talking about, well, what's going to be happening with regard to Russia? You know, if you're here in America, what's going to be happening with regard to Iran, North Korea? And, I suppose there's a bit of angst among the American people about, at least there is on my part, about, what's this North Korea thing how's this thing going to play out on the pages of history? And how's Putin going to play out? But what was, going back to, and of course we don't know. We absolutely don't know who might be in charge. The South Koreans introduced Trump as the leader of the world. Did you catch that in the news? Or when he spoke to the South Korean Assembly? The leader of the world. We don't know who's going to be the leader of the world, so to speak, in 25 years, in 50 years, or 30 years, or whatever. But if we had a prophet today, what would he be telling America? Well, he might be prophesying. He trying to determine what was going to happen. God knows what's going to happen 25 years from now. But what would he be talking? What would he be telling America? What was Isaiah telling to Judah? He's telling the same thing. You better depend on God, as opposed to forming alliances with Ashdod, which was right on the border of Egypt. You better get back to God, as opposed to making alliances with this country or that country. That's what Isaiah was doing. You see, as nations go, here was Hezekiah at that particular time. Hezekiah was dealing with, he was probably, we know he's had assemblages from ambassadors from Ethiopia. He was probably looking around, let's the nations here in this area get together, because there's that Assyrian assault's going to come. And Isaiah was essentially saying, just ignore all these alliances. You better get back to God, because the only hope you have is God. Well, let's look at in that kind of that framework. Let's look at since we haven't been here for 2 weeks, it was 2 weeks ago. Let's start with the first verse of chapter 20. In that year that Tartan came unto Ashdod. Now Tartan was a representative of the country of Assyria. In the year that Tartan came to Ashdod, Ashdod was on the border of Egypt. It was a way, that was the corridor to Egypt. He came into Ashdod. Then in parenthesis in the King James Version, when Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him, and he fought against Ashdod and took it. Now, why in the world why would Hezekiah or anybody in Judah, why would they be interested in dealing with Ashdod? Ashdod was one of the Philistine cities. Remember the Philistine cities, Gath, and Ekron, Ashdod, and so forth. There were 5 major cities in the Philistines. Now, Isaiah is putting forth a little history here. And at that time spake the Lord by Isaiah, the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Now, walking naked didn't mean he didn't have any clothes on. He just had some outer garments. Actually, it was just kind of shedding the prophet's garment. Prophets had you could probably tell a prophet in that age by the dress, you suppose? And probably the beard. I don't know. Well, I guess everybody had beards. But you could probably tell a prophet by the way... Pardon me? George. Probably tell a prophet by the way they dressed. God said, dress differently now. For 3 years, go barefooted and, up and down, the streets and highways and byways. So, what was the purpose of that? God often used lessons, right? He oftentimes used prophets. John the Baptist was told, he had something unique about him. What was that? Pardon me? Yeah. He had uniqueness about him. Well, now God says, you shed that prophet's uniqueness and just go about differently for 3 years. And this is going to be a sign, right? One of the prophets married a woman that wasn't exactly pure, right? Or became impure as a sign. Okay, now, you're going to do this as a sign. Now, why this sign with regard to Egypt? What's the message to the people of Judah? Well, he says, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopian captives, young and old, naked and barefooted, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. So, why was Isaiah given this sign? What did the people of Judah care about Egypt and Ethiopia and so forth getting carried away into captivity? What did they care about it? What was the message? What was the central message here? Pardon me?
There's no escaping this harmony unless you turn to God.
Well, and in this particular context, better not form any alliances with Egypt. They're not going to be able to help you. Why? In 3 years, what's going to happen? A terrible calamity. Captives being led away, exposed, naked, exposed, barefooted. The Assyrians were particularly people to their captives, according to history. And so the message was, and if we had a contemporary prophet, that message might be to America, don't deal with Putin. Don't deal with, what's his name in North Korea? So this was a contemporary message. Better be depending on God. And so, in verse 5, and they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. In other words, you really can't expect any help from these nations. The help is going to come from God. In verse 6, and the inhabitant of this isle, or this coastline, shall say in that day, behold, such is our expectation. Behold, such is our expectation. What were we thinking? What we were expecting? Whether we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, how shall we escape? Isaiah said there's going to be, these people aren't going to provide any escape from Assyria. If there's any escape, it's going to be from God, right? And we've said this 100 times. But God did provide them a way of escape from the Assyrians. Not through the power of Egypt or Ethiopia or any other nation, but we've repeated it 100 times here. But how did God, at that point in history, at this point in history, how did God provide a way of escape from the Assyrians?
Killed 185,000.
Yeah. In one night. One fell swoop, we might say. Now, do you suppose, the people of Judah, Hezekiah, all in the world are hurt? Sennacherib sent representatives, the king of Assyria sent representatives to, tell the people of Judah to give up. And Isaiah was in the background there with Hezekiah saying, God will take care of this situation. And he did. Well, when Israel looked out, or when Judah looked out over, when they had this situation where these 185,000 troops were killed, they died, what should have been the reaction of the people of Judah? What should have been their reaction? At least, pardon me? Should have what?
Stood up and objected to what was going on, but they died.
Well, we're going to find out later in the next chapter or two, that instead of them being thankful and, what'd you say, George? Okay. They apparently got involved in, some partying, we might say, instead of being, humbly grateful. And we're going to get to that, as Isaiah will point out here later. Well, so That should have been proof to the people of Judah that God, Isaiah said, God will take care of you. God took care of them. Now, were they grateful? I think as we look further, they may have been, rather jubilant, but in the wrong way. So now, Isaiah turns his attention to three nations now, as we mentioned earlier. Three nations being Babylon, Edom, and Arabia. Now, who was the father of the Edomites? Pardon me? Esau. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Esau was in the family, right? He was in the family of Abraham, in the family of Isaac, right? And what was the relationship? What kind of relationship did Israel have with Edom? Pardon me?
It was strange. It wasn't good.
When the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and they wanted to go through the land of Edom, what happened? You can't even. They agreed. They said, "Well, we won't take any of your water, your food. Just let us through." And the Edomites said, "No way." Okay, and so there was that warring relationship between Edom and Israel, throughout history. Well, what was these Arabians? Where'd they come from? What was their heritage? The Arabians. But the Arabians, they were the product of Ishmael. Who was Ishmael? By what?
Son of Abraham by his handmaid Hagar.
Yeah. And then there were some of those people of the desert people that were descended from Abraham's second wife, Keturah. So you have this, Abraham was the father of a lot of these folks. In fact, most of them in that area, right? Through his wife, his handmaiden, his second wife. So, this is a kind of an interesting mix. But all of them were warring kind of people. And, it was just kind of like throughout history, the nations were like, let's get Israel, right? Let's beat up on the kingdom of David. That was kind of the mentality. So the first in chapter 21, the first dozen verses there, the first 10 verses at least, deal with Babylon. And verse 1 says, "The burden of the desert of the sea." Now, here's so where do I get Babylon out of that? Well, going down to verse 9, he says, "And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen. All the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground." So this language, the burden of the desert of the sea, or the coastline apparently relates to Babylon. Now the question is, does this prophecy with regard to Babylon, does it relate to Babylon before it became a world power? The Babylon that destroyed Jerusalem and took the people of Judah captive? Or does it relate to some previous period of time when Babylon was not a world power? Now that's a question that has really confounded scholars, I think, commentators throughout the last couple hundred years. In terms of, in my mind, I don't know, which period of time this burden of Babylon applies to. I don't know whether it was before they became a world power or when they had the Jews in captivity and when they were losing and that when they lost the power to the Medo-Persians. So I don't know, maybe some of you preacher scholars know. Mark, do you know? Meadows, where's Meadows not here, is he? Yeah.
I was looking on Google.
Google. Okay.
In 721, Sargon crushes a rebellion. It says an uprising in the Philistine city of Ashdod, supported by Judah, Moab, Edom, and Egypt. So those are all those countries that we were just talking about.
Okay, now the 721 BC.
Yeah.
Remember that date.
And so that's in the city of Ashdod. He besieged Judah for 3 years, and so that could be the 3 years that Isaiah's walking around naked for. And so then then Babylon decides to rebel, which would have been pre-Babylonian Empire.
Okay.
And so he turns then to Babylon, and then he destroys or conquers Babylon there, and he unifies Assyria and Babylon, and then, so that could be so you have all those nations that are listed there in Isaiah right there. First there's the crushing of the rebellion in Ashdod with Egypt, Moab, and all those, and then he turns to Babylon, and then he conquers them.
Okay, so in 721 BC, when did Babylon fall to the Medo-Persians? It was 586, someplace along there? Would have been at least a century later. Pardon me?
Yeah, 530. It's the same period after they conquered.
Okay, so what Luke, the conclusion might be one of that this Isaiah was talking about this earlier period. Is that your conclusion?
Yeah, because it matches up with history.
Yeah. So, notwithstanding that, there are still those who believe it had to do with, the fall of Belshazzar at the time that the Medo-Persians took over. So, thank you. That's very informative for our discussion here. So, let's just go with what Luke had said there about it being an earlier period, because in a lot of ways it really makes sense that he's talking about Babylon at an earlier period than when Babylon fell the first time, or the second in this context, the second time. Now, it's kind of interesting that in Revelation, you've got this language, Babylon has fallen, right? The Revelation letter. Now, it's kind of interesting that John, the writer of Revelation, picked up that language. Now, there must have been some reason why Babylon was probably not the worst nation in the ancient world. But Babylon became known, it seems to me it became known as the evil empire, the epitome of evil, the poster child for evil. Does anyone know why that might have been? Mark, do you have any idea?
What you're saying is right. I don't know how it started.
Yeah. But there must have been something going on there because we have here, if it's true that the prophet was talking about Babylon at the earlier stages of history, there must have been something about Babylon that was really evil. Now,
They were very corrupt at that time.
yeah, they must have had a history of corruption. You know, over time, over Jimmy?
The book of Habakkuk tells us that the children of Israel were upset because God destroyed them with the Babylonians who were more corrupt than they were. How can you bring this nation that's more corrupt than we are and destroy us? You know?
Yeah.
So they were upset over that.
Yeah.
God used the Babylonian Empire to chastise his people.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Isaiah says, well, let's read that first verse again. The burden of the desert of the sea, this Babylonian group, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. Now, he says, a grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, as a part of the, no doubt that's part of the Persian group there. Besiege, O Media, all the sighing thereof have I made to cease. Therefore are my loins filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold upon me, as the pangs of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down. At the hearing of it, I was dismayed at the seeing of it. My heart panteth, and fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath turned into fear unto me. Now, why would Isaiah be upset? He apparently was greatly grieved about this prophecy, about this projected situation. Why would the prophet Isaiah be grieved about that? Seems to me that would have been a good thing if one of Israel's enemies was in a world of hurt. But why was he so grieved over that? Frankly, I have no idea. I'm looking for some. I'm looking for some help with that. Anyone have any clue as to why Isaiah would be grieved about, the fall of Babylon in the earlier stages of Babylon? I don't know. If no one has any instruction on that, we'll just go on. But for some reason, and as verse 6 says, for thus hath the Lord said unto me, go, set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses and a chariot of camels. And he hearkened diligently with much heed. Now, the signs of, the assault from the Assyrians were everywhere. That was what he was grieving about. Maybe Isaiah was just grieving about human destruction that was imminent with regard to the Assyrian assault. And he cried a lion. Now, when he said, and he cried a lion, what do you suppose that lion represented? Maybe Judah. Okay? A lion. My Lord, I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my ward the whole nights. Apparently grieving to watch this whole thing play out. And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her ground, or her gods, he hath broken unto the ground. O my threshing, and the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of the Lord of hosts, Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared unto you. What in the world could that be talking about? When he says there, O my threshing and the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared unto you. What? That idea of the threshing floor has a separation of the wheat from the chaff. Does this relate to, there's going to be, in terms of Israel watching these military skirmishes, that some good is going to come out of this for Israel?